This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This week on Roots and All, I'm joined by Ami Bouhassane to talk about her book Lee Miller, A Life with Food, Friends and Recipes. Lee Miller lived many lives: model, surrealist, war correspondent. But it was in the kitchen and garden at Farleys House that she found a kind of peace after the chaos. We explore how cooking became a creative outlet, the mystery of the unpublished entertaining freezer, and the role of the garden in shaping Lee's later life.
Lee Miller, she's a badass. She's my gran. She started off as a model and then she became a fashion photographer and a surrealist. She was also a surrealist photographer. And during the Second World War, she's one of the few women that were allowed to become war correspondents, and she's thought to be the only one that covered combat for the Allied forces in the Second World War. And she then, after the war, reinvented herself as a gourmet cook and died actually famous as a celebrity cook rather than a photographer.
Yeah, but funnily enough now, I think probably people are more surprised to hear about the cookery side. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, it's a kind of backhanded compliment in the fact that the archives has done so well in the last, we've been going for 47 years and it's been a really hard battle to get her recognised, particularly because she was a woman. Yeah, and now, people know her for her photography rather than her cooking. I remember when we had a really groundbreaking, it was a huge moment for us at the archives when we had her centenary exhibition at the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum, in 2007. And her best friend, Bettina McNulty, who was a food writer and a kind of travel writer for House and Garden magazine and various other kind of Condé Nast publications, she was there. And just before everybody came in, there was this kind of quiet moment where, like, the family, we got to enjoy the show before everyone arrived for the private view. And she just turned to me and she said, "Don't you forget she was an amazing cook, Amy. Don't let everyone forget that." So I was like, okay, we'll try. It took 10 years to write the cookbook. And Bettina was there with me the whole way through because she was Lee's best friend in the later years of her life. She had helped Lee with a lot of kind of presenting the food for spreads, and like when they were doing the food photography and things like that, she'd been there kind of helping Lee cook up different ideas and been on some of her food adventures with her. So it was amazing to be able to have such a primary source with me while I was kind of researching everything and putting it together.
So I will go on to talk about the book, obviously, but you mentioned the archives. Where are they located?
So we are located in Farleys House and Gallery, which is Lee's house, which is based in East Sussex in Muddles Green, which is a tiny village in the middle of nowhere, which is where Lee and Roland came to live in 1949 after the war. And when she got the keys which was on April Fool's Day, she wrote this letter to her mum and dad. She was so excited. She's like, "You laugh at me. I'm a farmer's wife now. I've got cows and chickens." And then she starts boasting about her huge vegetable garden, which she says mostly grows stinging nettles at that point. But yeah, so we're based here, and it was here also that after the war, when she was really suffering from PTSD, what's now known as PTSD, and it's here that she hid at Farley's, that she hid her photography away in the attic. And after really struggling to work out what she was going to do and trying to become a fashion photographer again, but getting excited about hats and handbags is quite difficult once you've lived through a war situation and watched soldiers being mown down next to you and things. So in the end, she buried it and decided that she was still a really creative, imaginative person and still wanted a career, and cooking was the way she turned.
Yeah, and did she always have a love of cooking from an early age?
Yeah, I didn't realise until I was researching it, but she did. Even like she didn't write much in her diaries when she was younger because I think she was too busy getting up to mischief. But there's a couple of little notes where she talks about, there's one that really made me giggle because she talks about how she's spent her whole lunch hour this is at Vassar College, in her late teens. She spent her whole lunch hour putting all of her friends off their food so that they wouldn't want to eat it and she could.
So she was definitely into food.
So she's definitely into food, and she even kind of credits kind of Man Ray when she lived in Paris in the early 30s as being the one that introduced her to good wine and good eating. And there's a letter where I think he wrote to her mum saying to her mum that she eats like a pig. In those days, being a model, you didn't have to be 6 foot plus tall and stick thin. I mean, it was more fashionable for models to be kind of more of a sporty build, which I think worked fairly well for Lee's body type. And she was only 5'7". She wasn't really, really tall or anything. I think that was in her favour when it came to modelling.
And the food, obviously.
And the food, yes.
So you said about it's difficult to go back to that life of high fashion when you've seen what you've seen during wartime. And then the food, I mean, I might be reading too much into it, but do you think it was almost like a nostalgia thing getting back into it?
I think it was a mixture of a lot of things. And it's like certain recipes, I think, really took her back to nicer times. So in a way, some of it's nostalgic. Like she learned about how to use spices in the 5 years that she lived in Egypt because she'd love going on adventures in the desert, and camping out there for a week or so. And when you go into the desert in Egypt, you can't take any fresh food because it just dies straight away with the heat. So you take a lot of canned goods, but to make the canned food taste nice, you take a load of spices. So a lot of her cooking recipes actually hark back to the kind of North African uses of spices with a lot of coriander and cumin and those kind of things. And that's when she learnt that side of things. And then there was moments in the Second World War when there, was a quiet between the fighting in Alsace when she was with the Allied forces there, and there was some quite fierce fighting that winter of 1944-45. And in the quiet moments, she would hang out with the French Legionnaire soldiers, and they would teach her how to cook French stews in empty shell cases over open fires and things like that. So these kind of little moments that I think helped her remember good times in a way.
And also, it, I guess, was an artistic activity. It was an expression of her creativity.
Oh, totally. And you can go into so many depths. If you think about what she'd seen during the war, particularly in the prison camps, when she'd gone there and she'd found all these starved bodies who hadn't had enough food, to have survived that and to have food and to be able to share it with others who survived. And obviously they've all lived through rationing as food shortages themselves too. Food becomes so much more important. And then the added bit to it is becoming creative. When you create something, you put a bit of yourself in it, don't you? So it's her kind of way of giving something back and sharing some of her love that maybe she can't say it herself, but it's producing these beautiful dishes, sometimes crazy dishes as well. Sometimes they're a bit wacky, other times they're gourmet, but putting your heart and soul into something that you're then going to share with people that are important to you is a wonderful thing.
So was she a surrealist cook?
She was both. For her 50th birthday, she decided this was kind of where the kind of pivotal moment where she decided to become a cook. And she sent herself to Paris to study cordon bleu cooking for 6 months. And she came back and said, I hate cordon bleu cooking. I'm going to be a gourmet cook instead. So some of her recipes are kind of more gourmet. Others are a little bit more kind of crazy, like blue spaghetti and golden meatloaf, and there was one early dish that she did where she covered a whole chicken in edible gold leaf. And she kind of experimented a lot with food colorings and other things like that. So she liked to kind of be quite imaginative, but she also liked to kind of create as well really beautiful kind of gourmet meals as well.
And aside from the look of the food that she was creating, and some of that could be seen as fairly whimsical, I suppose, but she was a seriously accomplished cook and prize winning and, like swept the board. She was so good at it. But at the time, how avant-garde would her stuff have appeared? I'm guessing not that much, because people were just saying, this is fantastic, here, have a prize, I think it was a freezer, wasn't it? And, and just loving what she did.
She won all sorts. She's won a cooker. She won a 20-kilo bag of Spanish onions. She won a trip to Norway. Yeah, she won all sorts of crazy. But that's what I love about her. And that's why I think cooking and using the garden and the produce here at Farleys was so important to her. Because she went in, just like with photography, she went in like boots and all. With photography, she was always interested in different angles, different lighting, different techniques. With cooking, she was always interested in different ingredients, different gadgets. She loved to stretch her creativity and her kind of imagination by doing these cooking competitions. And a lot of the competitions in those days, like post-war in the 50s and 60s, were prescriptive. They were around certain ingredients. A lot of it was kind of canned goods, things like that. So it meant that she then had to, like one of the competitions, the one that she won the cooker with was, we think it was a corn flour competition, and you had to invent 10 recipes that used corn flour as the primary ingredient in it. And so, having to stretch your brain and being restricted like that is, something that artists do by restricting themselves to a particular color or a particular brush or something like that in order to kind of force a different type of style or creativity.
Yeah, it's amazing, just the sheer inventiveness of it. And you mentioned the garden as well. And I'm guessing that became, once the stinging nettles were evicted, I'm guessing it became quite an important part of her kitchen.
Oh, totally. She did try stinging nettle soup, but decided that wasn't that yummy. But I think today she would have got in quite a lot of trouble because she was getting her mum and dad to send her over seeds and things from America, which I don't think you can do anymore, for different varieties of fruit and vegetables that they grew over here. Because an example, she wanted to grow sweet corn here. And the letter that she writes to her mum and dad asking them to send her sweet corn seeds is that over here at that time, we just grew sweet corn to feed our cattle and our horses, and it was really chewy and rough. And she said, the English have no idea what sweet corn's supposed to taste like. Can you send me over some proper sweet corn seeds? Things like that.
And so you've still got a garden plot at Farleys, and obviously a lot of people that are listening are going to be into their gardens. Is it still in use?
Yeah, we do not entertain as much as she did. So the vegetable patch is only a third of the size it was in her day.
Wow. And it's big. I've seen it. It's big.
It's big, yeah.
Yeah.
We're slowly trying to reinstate it because we're now growing some vegetables that we use in some of the dishes we serve in the cafe here. But yeah, she used to have a whole section that was just like a soft fruit cages, because I remember it as a kid. There was just rows and rows of raspberry bushes in this netted cage that we could go in, and my sister and I would sneak in there and steal raspberries. Well, we still got some plum trees in here, and she also had an orchard which they planted up. Sadly, we lost quite a few of the original trees in the 1987 storm, but there's still a couple that are still going, and we're slowly reinstating the trees into the orchard. But yeah, they just grew everything.
Incredible. But the book is brilliant, and I saw it and I thought, I've got to have it. I've got far too many books. I buy books everywhere, and I thought, no, I'm not going to buy a book while I'm there. And I was like, I know I've got to have this book. It's bloody brilliant. And there's just so many pictures in it, so much information and stuff that just blows your mind. But also there's a lot of funny things in it. And I think it's fair to say that as much as Lee kind of embraced the country life, were the elements of it that she wasn't quite so keen on?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I talked about how she was really excited in her first letter to her mum and dad. But it's like kind of a month or so later, she talks about how she's just tried to measure up all the windows in the house for curtains, and she just realised that nothing is straight in the whole of the farmhouse. And she says she's now lying down and having a drink because she's got a massive headache trying to work out the curtain sizes. And then she gets to winter, and obviously it's an old farmhouse and there's no central heating. So her tone kind of completely changes then.
Yeah, I mean, I sympathise with her sometimes, having moved to the countryside myself. When you're stuck behind a load of cows or something, yeah.
Yeah, Roland installed central heating pretty quickly, and Patsy, who was their son's nanny, she jokes that one of the reasons why Lee started cooking was because the only warm room in the house was the kitchen, and that was because of the Aga.
Well, I can well believe it. So, you've put this book together now, and as you said, it took a while to kind of happen. But in the background of Lee's cooking, she was also collating recipes and things. And am I right in thinking that she basically put together a book?
Yeah, she had. We didn't know about it at all. And it wasn't until we'd put a completely different book to the one that we ended up doing, we'd put together, which was mostly just recipes. And we wanted to reproduce and photograph a recipe, which is her green bitch recipe, because it's quite funny, the little notes that she put around the edge of it, which is like guacamole that she's kind of tweaked and added some alcohol to. And I just couldn't find it anywhere. And I was going back through all the boxes of her kind of cookery notes and bits of paper with recipes on and stuff. And right at the bottom of the last box, I found this envelope that I'd previously dismissed because I thought it was empty. I thought, I can't have got in here, but I'll have a look anyway. And instead of finding this recipe, there was something in the envelope, and it was these really paper thin sheets of, the airmail type paper. And in it was a letter from this agent in New York who was writing to Lee about her cookbook. And I was like, your what? And amazingly, this lady was still alive and still connected to the agency, and they were able to put me in touch with her. And then like 3 months later, this parcel came in the post with a little note where she said, I remember your grandmother. We worked on this cookbook together, and we did all the styling pages, and she did the sample recipes and things. And something made me keep it. So I've got it, and I'm giving it back to you. And so she sent it to me. And it was amazing. Lee's book was going to be called The Entertaining Freezer. And it was really a mixture of trying to empower other women, at a time in the 50s and 60s where women were particularly still supposed to be tied to the kitchen sink and kind of tied to entertaining their husband and making sure that they have wonderful meals on the table. But the idea is to use a freezer to have pre-prepared meals so that you weren't always tied down and that you had stuff on hand. So she comes up with things that in the book that are kind of novelty stuff now. Like she talks about infusing vinegars and olive oils with herbs from the garden. She talks about having cookie dough already made and in the freezer so you can just slice bits off and cook them when people arrive. It's just amazing how ahead of things she was, even with her cooking.
Yeah, and amazing that it never kind of saw the light of day.
Well, it's sad because she was working on it in the mid-70s. This was like 73, 74. And initially, one of the letters says that Simon and Schuster turned it down, which I think they might be a bit annoyed about that. But then she got quite ill and she died without it being realised and without it happening. And that's why Phyllis in America, the agent, kept it.
That's just a real goosebump story, and fantastic that you resurrected it and that you've given it this new lease of life. And it is just so good. It's a brilliant book, and I love it. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Thank you.
It's nice because Lee continues to live on, not just through the photography and, all the other work that she did, but also through the cookery side. And with that in mind, how many of the recipes are you still making today?
Funny you should say that, but I'm like, my stomach is rumbling because there's a cooking workshop going on in the house, in the kitchen at the moment. And they're cooking Lee's dishes. They were out in the garden earlier. Lee instated a herb garden right near to the back door of the kitchen so that she could just go grab herbs for her food. So they were out picking a load of Lee's herbs and stuff to use in the dishes. And they've made her cauliflower breasts and her coriander rice salad, which is my favourite because it's got so many really lovely fresh herbs, but also coriander seeds that she boils, which is something I'd never thought of. Yeah, they've just made some really yummy stuff. And it was kind of torturous sitting in my office upstairs smelling it. But it's also like so nice seeing people using the kitchen for what it's supposed to be used for and kind of ignoring the Picasso pictures on the walls while they're slicing and dicing.
A huge thank you to Amy for sharing that personal and enlightening portrait of Lee Miller's life, food and legacy, and to you for tuning in. If you liked today's exploration of culinary creativity in gardening, you might like episode 324, Kitchen Garden Living, and episode 328, Soil Health and Nutrition. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.